And the emperor's decree, the oil lamp flickers against the darkness of your study, casting shadows that dance across scrolls and tablets scattered about your desk. Another sleepless night, another moment when the weight you carry feels heavier than the marble columns holding up the greatest empire the world has ever known. But tonight, I want to take you somewhere else entirely, to a different kind of sleeplessness in a different age, where a man much like yourself faced a choice that would define not just his life, but the very foundations of how we think about resilience in the face of impossible circumstances. It is the year 93 of the Common Era. Rome stretches from the mists of Britain to the deserts of Syria, a testament to human ambition and the relentless pursuit of what we might call expansion. But empires, like the enterprises you're building, are fragile things. They depend not just on strength, but on the delicate balance between order and freedom, between control and trust. In the Palatine Hill, Emperor Domitian sits in his marble halls, surrounded by the trappings of absolute power. Yet he cannot sleep either. The weight he carries is different from yours, but no less crushing. Every shadow might hide an assassin. Every senator's smile might mask betrayal. Every philosopher's teaching might plant seeds of rebellion in minds he desperately needs to control. You see, Domitian understood something that keeps many leaders awake at night, that ideas are more dangerous than armies. A sword can only reach as far as an arm can swing it, but a thought can travel across continents, leap from mind to mind, and outlive the very stones of the empire itself. And so, on this particular autumn morning, as the first light touches the 7 hills of Rome, Domitian makes a decision that will echo through history. He calls for his scribes, his messengers, his instruments of imperial will. The decree he dictates is simple, brutal in its clarity. All philosophers must leave Rome. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. Picture the scene unfolding across the greatest city in the world. In the markets where merchants haggle over silk from China and spices from India, the news spreads like ripples across water. In the bathhouses where citizens gather to debate the affairs of the day, conversations fall to whispers. In the schools where young minds are shaped, teachers suddenly find themselves transformed from respected educators to enemies of the state. Among them is a man we shall call Lucius, not because history has preserved his name, but because history is full of such men, quiet scholars whose names are forgotten, but whose influence shaped the world in ways we're still discovering. Lucius is perhaps 40 years of age, with the kind of weathered hands that come from years of copying texts by lamplight, the kind of tired eyes that speak of countless nights spent wrestling with questions that have no easy answers. This morning, Lucius sits in his modest dwelling near the Subura, Rome's most crowded district. The walls are lined with scrolls, works of Epictetus, fragments of Heraclitus, his own careful notes on the nature of virtue and the pursuit of wisdom. This room is his life's work, his sanctuary, the physical manifestation of everything he has built over decades of patient study and teaching. But now, as the imperial messenger's voice echoes through the streets below, that sanctuary becomes a prison he must abandon. The weight Lucius carries in this moment is one you might recognize. It's the weight of watching everything you've built suddenly become, not worthless, but certainly vulnerable. It's the weight of realizing that forces beyond your control can reshape your entire world with a single decision. It's the weight of understanding that survival might require abandoning not just comfort, but identity itself. Lucius moves through his room with the careful deliberation of a man who knows he has perhaps hours to distill a lifetime into what he can carry. Which scrolls are essential? Which ideas cannot be left behind? Which fragments of wisdom might prove vital in whatever uncertain future awaits? He pauses at a particular text, a collection of teachings about the dichotomy of control, about focusing energy only on what can be influenced and accepting what cannot. The irony is not lost on him. Here he is, a student of Stoic philosophy, facing the ultimate test of his own principles. Can he practice what he has spent years teaching others? Outside his window, Rome continues its eternal rhythm. Merchants still call their wares, children still play in the narrow streets, the aqueducts still bring fresh water from distant mountains. The empire's vast machinery of commerce and administration grinds on, seemingly indifferent to the exile of a few dozen thinkers whose only crime was believing that wisdom should be pursued regardless of political convenience. But Lucius understands something that perhaps even Domitian does not fully grasp. Philosophy is not just an academic exercise, not just the idle speculation of men with too much time and too little responsibility. Philosophy is the foundation upon which everything else rests. It's the invisible architecture that determines how we respond to crisis, how we make decisions under pressure, how we find meaning when everything we thought we understood suddenly shifts beneath our feet. As he carefully wraps his most precious scrolls, Lucius thinks about his students, young men and women who came to him not seeking easy answers but better questions, people carrying their own invisible weights, the burden of family expectations, the pressure of financial uncertainty, the challenge of trying to live with integrity in a world that often rewards the opposite. What will happen to them now? Who will remind them that their character is the one thing that can never be taken from them? Who will help them understand that external circumstances, no matter how dramatic, need not determine internal peace? The sun climbs higher, and with it comes urgency. Other philosophers are already leaving, their carts loaded with books and belongings, their faces set with the grim determination of people who have no choice but to move forward. Some head north toward Gaul, others east toward Greece. A few, Lucius has heard, are making for a place that exists more in whispered rumors than reliable reports, a hidden sanctuary where learning can continue undisturbed by the political winds that sweep across empires. This sanctuary, if it truly exists, is said to be nestled in a remote valley, protected not by walls or soldiers, but by its very obscurity, a place where the pursuit of wisdom is valued above the accumulation of power, where the most important questions are not about conquest or control, but about how to live well in an uncertain world. As Lucius secures the last of his essential possessions, he faces a choice that you, in your own way, might recognize. He can try to blend in, to disappear into the vast anonymous crowd of the empire and hope that this persecution passes. He can abandon his calling and find some safer, more conventional way to make his living. Or he can embrace the uncertainty, accept the risk, and continue pursuing what he believes matters most, regardless of the cost. The weight of this decision settles on his shoulders like a familiar cloak. It's the same weight carried by anyone who has ever chosen the difficult path over the easy one, who has ever decided that some things are worth preserving, even when preservation requires sacrifice. He thinks of the great philosophers who came before him, men who faced their own moments of crisis with dignity and purpose. Socrates drinking hemlock rather than abandoning his principles. Epictetus transforming the experience of slavery into insights about true freedom. Each of them faced with circumstances beyond their control, each finding ways to maintain their inner sovereignty even when their external world collapsed. The afternoon light slants through his window, and Lucius knows his time in Rome is measured now in hours, not days. He takes one last look around the room that has been his world, trying to memorize not just the physical details, but the feeling of this place, the sense of purpose it represented, the community of inquiry it fostered, the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered even if it was never celebrated. Tomorrow, he will be on the road, carrying his life's work on his back, heading toward an uncertain destination, guided only by rumors and hope. Tonight, he will sleep, or try to sleep, in the city that has been his home but can no longer offer him sanctuary. Yet as he extinguishes his lamp and settles into what may be his last night in Rome, Lucius carries with him something that no emperor can decree away, something more portable than scrolls and more durable than marble. He carries the understanding that true security comes not from external circumstances, but from internal resources, that the sanctuary he seeks might not be a place at all, but a way of thinking, an approach to life that can be practiced anywhere. The road ahead is uncertain, filled with dangers he cannot anticipate and challenges he cannot yet imagine. But it is also filled with possibilities, for growth, for discovery, for the kind of transformation that only comes when we are forced to discover what we're truly made of. And perhaps, in ways neither he nor Domitian can foresee, this exile will prove to be not an ending, but a beginning. Not a defeat, but an opportunity to plant the seeds of something that will outlast empires and transform the world in ways that armies never could. The journey towards sanctuary is about to begin. Finding sanctuary. The dawn breaks cold and grey as Lucius steps beyond the gates of Rome for what he knows will be the last time. The weight of finality settles on his shoulders like morning mist. But he is not alone. 3 other figures emerge from the shadows of the city walls. Marcus, a fellow teacher whose school was shuttered the same day as his own. Helena, a rare woman philosopher whose sharp mind had earned her both respect and suspicion in equal measure. And young Quintus, barely 20, whose promising career in rhetoric has been cut short before it could truly begin. They exchange few words in these first hours. What is there to say? Each carries their own burden of loss, their own private grief for the life left behind. But there is something else in their silence, a shared understanding perhaps. A recognition that they are bound together now by more than circumstance. As the sun climbs higher, Rome shrinks behind them until it becomes nothing more than a smudge on the horizon. The great roads that once seemed to promise connection to every corner of the empire now feel like arteries leading away from a dying heart. You know this feeling, don't you? That moment when you realize you cannot continue on the path you've been walking, when the very foundation of what you've built begins to crack beneath your feet. The weight you carry shifts then, doesn't it? What once felt like progress suddenly feels like burden. But Lucius has prepared for this. In the months since the decree was announced, he has quietly gathered information, whispered conversations with merchants, careful questions posed to travelers. There are places, they say, beyond the reach of imperial edicts, remote valleys where the old ways still hold sway, communities that value wisdom over politics, truth over power. The small band turns east, following paths that grow narrower and less traveled with each passing day. They walk through landscapes that seem untouched by the grand ambitions of emperors, rolling hills covered in wild grass, ancient groves where the trees remember older gods, streams that have carved their channels according to laws far more enduring than any written by human hands. At night, they make simple camps. Helena proves surprisingly adept at coaxing flames from damp wood. Marcus, despite his scholarly appearance, shows an unexpected knowledge of which plants can supplement their meager rations. Young Quintus, his initial despair gradually giving way to curiosity, begins to ask questions about the countryside they're passing through. And Lucius finds himself remembering why he became a philosopher in the first place. Not for the prestige of a Roman school, not for the approval of wealthy students, but for moments like these. Moments when the mind is free to wander, when conversation flows naturally from observation, when wisdom emerges not from books, but from the simple act of paying attention to what is. "Tell me," Helena asks one evening as they rest beside a small fire, "what exactly are we looking for?" It's Marcus who answers first. "Safety," he says simply, "a place where we can think without fear." "But safety from what?" Quintus presses. "Domitian's reach is long, but surely not infinite. We could simply disappear. Live quietly. Avoid attention." Lucius pokes at the fire with a stick, watching sparks rise into the darkness. "We could," he agrees, "but would that be enough? To simply survive?" The question hangs in the air like smoke. You've asked yourself something similar, haven't you? In those quiet moments when the immediate crises have been managed and the urgent emails answered, what exactly are you building? What legacy are you creating beyond mere survival? "I've been thinking," Lucius continues, "about what the emperor fears. Why exile philosophers? Why not simply ignore us?" "Because ideas are dangerous," Helena suggests. "No," Lucius shakes his head. "Ideas are only dangerous when they take root, when they grow, when they spread from person to person until they become unstoppable." He looks around at his companions, these fellow exiles who have become something more than refugees. They have become, perhaps without realizing it, the seeds of something new. The days blur together as they travel deeper into the countryside. They pass through villages where the people eye them with curiosity but not hostility. Philosophers in exile are not uncommon in these times, and there is a certain sympathy for those who have fallen afoul of imperial displeasure. In one such village, an old farmer approaches their camp. His hands are gnarled from decades of work, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes are sharp with intelligence. "You're looking for something," he observes. "It's not a question." "We are," Lucius admits. The farmer nods slowly. There's a place, he says after a long pause, 3 days' walk from here, up in the hills. Old farmstead. Been empty for, oh, must be 10 years now. The family moved to the city, chasing dreams of easier living. He chuckles dryly. The land's good, though. Good water, sheltered from the worst winds, might suit your purposes. He gives them directions, landmarks to watch for, paths to follow. As he turns to leave, he pauses. Word of advice, he says. The land remembers those who treat it well, and it provides for those who understand its rhythms. 3 days later, they crest a hill and see it spread before them. A valley carved from the surrounding countryside like a green bowl. Ancient olive trees dot the slopes, their silver leaves catching the afternoon light. A stream winds through the bottom, its water clear and cold. And there, nestled against the hillside, as if it had grown from the earth itself, stands the farmhouse. It's not much to look at, truth be told. The roof needs repair. Weeds have claimed what was once a garden. The wooden shutters hang askew, and the stone walls show gaps where mortar has crumbled away. But there's something about the place. Something that speaks of possibility rather than decay, of potential waiting to be awakened. Well, Marcus says after a long silence, it's not exactly the academy. Helena laughs, the first truly joyful sound any of them have made in weeks. No, she agrees, it's better, it's ours. They spend that first night in the open courtyard, too excited to sleep indoors just yet. The stars above seem brighter here, away from the glow of the city. The silence is profound, but not empty, filled with the rustle of leaves, the distant call of nightbirds, the whisper of wind through grass. You know, Quintus says thoughtfully, I think I understand now what you meant about ideas taking root. Lucius raises an eyebrow. Oh? The young man gestures around them. This place, it's like a blank scroll, isn't it? We can write whatever we want here, create whatever we choose to create. And in that moment, Lucius feels something shift inside him. The weight he's been carrying, the grief for what was lost, the uncertainty about what comes next. It doesn't disappear, but it transforms, becomes something lighter, more manageable. You know this feeling too, perhaps. That moment when the burden you've been carrying reveals itself to be not just weight, but raw material. Not just something to be endured, but something to be shaped into whatever you're brave enough to build. The work begins at dawn. They clear debris from the main room, patch holes in the roof, shore up sagging beams. It's hard labor, the kind that leaves hands blistered and backs aching. But there's satisfaction in it, the immediate, tangible progress that comes from applying effort to a clear problem. As they work, they talk about the kind of place they want to create, about the ideas they want to explore, about the possibility of others joining them, fellow seekers who might find their way to this hidden valley. We'll need rules, Helena points out, as they take a break from hauling stones to repair a wall. Will we? Lucius asks. What kind of rules? Simple ones, Marcus suggests. Practical ones. Who does what work, how decisions get made, how we handle disagreements. But Quintus shakes his head. Those aren't the rules that matter. The rules that matter are deeper, about how we treat each other, about what we're really trying to accomplish here. And so, as the sun sets on their first full day in the valley, they sit in a circle and begin to articulate something that is part constitution, part philosophy, part prayer. They will seek truth above comfort, question assumptions, including their own, welcome honest disagreement while rejecting personal attack, share both the work and the rewards of their common endeavor. Most importantly, they will remember that what they're building here is not just a refuge for themselves, but a foundation for something larger, something that might, in time, change the world. The weight you carry tonight, it's not so different from what Lucius felt as he looked around that simple farmhouse and imagined what it might become. The uncertainty, yes, but also the possibility, the chance to create something meaningful from the raw materials of challenge and choice. Sometimes sanctuary isn't a place you find. Sometimes it's a place you build. One stone, one idea, one choice at a time. The rhythm of rural life. The seasons began to teach them what Rome never could. In the city, time had been measured by the opening of markets, the sessions of the Senate, the endless procession of appointments and obligations. Here, time moved differently. It flowed with the natural rhythm of sun and shadow, of seed time and harvest, of the patient turning of the earth itself. You know this feeling, don't you? Those rare moments when you step away from the endless notifications, the urgent emails, the crushing weight of deadlines, and suddenly notice the quality of light falling through your window, the way the world continues its ancient dance, regardless of your quarterly projections or board presentations. Lucius discovered this truth in those first weeks at the farmstead. He would wake not to the harsh clang of city bells, but to the gentle chorus of birds greeting the dawn. The air was different here. Cleaner, yes, but more than that. It carried the scent of wild herbs, of earth after rain, of possibilities that had nothing to do with politics or power. The work began at sunrise, not because some emperor demanded it, not because markets opened or competitors threatened, but because the land itself called them to partnership. Marcus, the former senator, proved surprisingly adept at coaxing life from soil. His hands, once soft from a lifetime of rhetoric and comfort, grew calloused and strong as he learned the patience required to tend growing things. "Strange," he said one morning, kneeling between rows of young barley, "I spent 30 years arguing about the governance of men, but I never understood governance until I learned to work with what the earth was already trying to give." Theron, the teacher, found his own rhythm in the olive groves. The ancient trees, gnarled and weathered, seemed to speak to something deep in his philosopher's soul. He would move among them in the early morning light, checking for signs of disease, pruning dead branches, his movements becoming a kind of meditation. "These trees," he told Lucius one afternoon, "some of them have been here for centuries. They've weathered droughts, storms, the rise and fall of who knows how many governments. And still they give their fruit. Still they reach toward the light. You understand this wisdom, don't you? The weight you carry. It feels so urgent, so immediate. The decisions that keep you awake, the problems that seem to demand your constant attention. But there's something profoundly settling about remembering that the world has seen countless crises before yours. That persistence, patience, the steady application of effort toward worthy goals. These have always been the real forces that shape lasting change." Gaius, the young idealist, threw himself into every task with the enthusiasm of someone discovering that philosophy wasn't just about ideas. It was about how you lived, how you moved through the world, how you treated the soil beneath your feet and the people beside you. The days took on their own natural architecture. Dawn brought the physical work. Tending crops, repairing tools, maintaining the buildings, they were slowly transforming from abandoned ruins into something approaching home. The morning sun was gentle, perfect for tasks requiring careful attention. Weeding, grafting new growth onto old vines, mending what time and weather had worn. As the sun climbed higher and the heat grew more intense, they would retreat to the shade of the great olive tree that dominated the farmyard. Here, in the dappled light, they would share the simple meal they had prepared together. Bread baked in their own stone oven, cheese from the goats they had acquired from a neighboring farmer, olives from their own trees pressed into oil that tasted like liquid sunshine. And here, in these afternoon hours, the real work began. Not the work of hands, but the work of minds and hearts. The conversations that would, in time, reshape how they understood wisdom itself. "Tell me," Lucius said one day, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead, "what have we learned here that we never learned in all our years in the city?" The question hung in the warm air like incense. Marcus was the first to speak. "I've learned that most of what I thought was urgent wasn't. Most of what I thought was important wasn't. But the things I barely noticed, the taste of water when you're truly thirsty, the satisfaction of bread you've made with your own hands, the way silence can be fuller than any speech, these turn out to be everything. You feel this truth, don't you? In your quietest moments, when the noise of ambition and anxiety finally subsides, you remember what actually matters. Not the metrics or the milestones, but the people you serve, the values you're trying to embody, the small daily choices that either align with your deepest convictions or don't." Theron nodded slowly. "The Stoics speak of living according to nature, but in Rome I thought that meant following some abstract principle. Here I understand. It means working with what is, rather than fighting what isn't. It means accepting the rhythm of seasons, of growth, of patience. It means understanding that wisdom isn't something you possess, it's something you practice. Gaius, ever the questioner, pushed deeper. But surely we haven't abandoned the world by coming here. Surely we haven't given up on changing things, on making them better. Lucius smiled, remembering his own doubts during those first difficult weeks. No, he said quietly. We've just learned that you can't give what you don't have. You can't bring peace to others if you haven't found it in yourself. You can't teach wisdom if you haven't learned to live it. The conversations would continue as the afternoon shadows lengthened. They discussed the great questions that had always occupied philosophers. But now their words were grounded in something real. They spoke of virtue while their hands bore the honest calluses of useful work. They debated the nature of the good life while surrounded by the simple abundance they were creating together. As evening approached, there were final tasks to complete. Animals to feed, tools to clean and store. The endless small acts of stewardship that keeping a place requires. But there was something else happening in these evening hours, something that none of them had quite expected. People began to come. At first, just neighbors, farmers from the surrounding valleys who had heard that philosophers had taken up residence in the old abandoned farmstead. They came with curiosity, sometimes with skepticism, but they stayed for the conversations. "We heard you city folk were trying to grow things," said an old farmer named Antonius. His weathered face creased with what might have been amusement. "Thought we'd see if you needed any actual advice." But as the evening wore on, as they shared wine and bread and the kind of unhurried conversation that only happens when people have nowhere else they need to be, Antonius found himself asking different questions. "This philosophy you talk about," he said, staring into the fire they had built in the farmyard, "does it have anything to say about how a man deals with losing his son to fever, about how he keeps working his land when it feels like the earth itself has betrayed him?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of recognition, of shared humanity, of the understanding that wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about being willing to sit with the questions that matter most. These evening gatherings became a regular occurrence. Word spread, as word does in rural communities, that something unusual was happening at the old farmstead, that there were men there who had given up wealth and position to pursue something harder to name but somehow more valuable. They came with their own burdens, these visitors, the weight of failed harvests and sick children and marriages grown cold, the universal human struggles that no amount of political theory or abstract philosophy could touch. But they found something here that they hadn't expected. Not answers exactly, but something better, a way of holding their questions that made them feel less alone, a practice of attention that made ordinary moments extraordinary. You know this feeling, don't you? Those rare conversations that remind you why you started building what you're building in the first place. Not for the metrics or the recognition, but for the possibility of creating something genuinely useful. Something that makes the world a little more human, a little more connected, a little more alive to its own possibilities. As Lucius would lie in his simple bed each night, listening to the sounds of the countryside, the distant call of an owl, the rustle of wind through olive leaves, the contented settling of animals in their shelter, he began to understand something that had eluded him through all his years of study. Sanctuary wasn't something you built once and then inhabited forever. It was something you created fresh each day through the quality of attention you brought to ordinary tasks, through the way you listened to others, through your willingness to let the work change you as much as you changed it. The weight you carry tonight, it's part of the same ancient human project that Lucius was discovering in that hidden valley, the attempt to create something meaningful in the face of uncertainty, to build something that serves others while remaining true to your deepest values. Sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply begin again. To let the rhythm of real work, of genuine service, of patient attention to what matters most, teach you what no amount of planning or strategizing ever could. The sanctuary was taking shape, not just in the restored buildings or the flourishing crops, but in the quality of life they were learning to live together. One conversation, one shared meal, one moment of genuine presence at a time. Nourishment for body and soul. And perhaps this is what you're discovering too, in whatever form your own sanctuary takes, that the moments which truly nourish us are often the simplest ones. Picture, if you will, the evening meal at their rough-hewn table. No elaborate feast, just what the earth had given them that day. Olives pressed from their own grove, their oil golden in the lamplight. Bread still warm from the clay oven Lucius had learned to tend, the crust crackling as they broke it together. Fresh cheese from the goat that had wandered into their valley and decided to stay. As if even the animals sensed something different about this place. The vegetables came from soil their own hands had turned, carrots pulled that morning, still carrying the honest dirt of their making. Greens that Marcus had coaxed from seed, watching with the patience you might recognize. The same patience you've learned in building what you're building, knowing that some things simply cannot be rushed. But it wasn't the food itself that nourished them most deeply. It was the way they gathered, the way Antonius would pause before eating, not in formal prayer, but in genuine recognition. Recognition of the hands that had planted, the rain that had fallen, the sun that had warmed the growing things into being. We are fed by so much more than food, he would say quietly, and they would sit with that truth, letting it settle like good wine. You know this feeling, don't you? Those rare moments when you step back from the endless doing and simply receive. When you notice the coffee someone made for you, the message from a friend who was thinking of you, the way the light falls across your desk at the end of a long day, reminding you that beauty exists alongside all the weight you carry. At their table, conversation moved like a gentle stream, no urgent agenda, no problems to solve before the meal grew cold. They spoke of what they'd noticed that day, the way the olive trees seemed to shimmer in the afternoon heat, how the youngest goat had learned to follow Marcus around the garden, as if he were her philosopher too. Sometimes they would share stories from their former lives, not with regret, but with the kind of perspective that distance brings. The way you might look back now at some crisis that once consumed you and see how it led you exactly where you needed to go. Lucius found himself thinking often of his teacher's words. We are not disturbed by things, but by our judgments about things. Here, surrounded by the simple reality of bread and olives and honest conversation, those judgments seemed to lose their grip. The urgent became less urgent. The catastrophic revealed itself as merely challenging. After the meal, they would move to the fire. Always the fire, that most ancient of human gatherings. The flames would dance while they settled into the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to perform for each other, who could simply be. Sometimes Gaius would bring out his lyre. His fingers had grown calloused from farm work, but they still remembered the old songs. Melodies that spoke of longing and homecoming, of journeys that led not to distant places, but to deeper truths. The music would weave through the crackle of burning wood, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to hold all their unspoken hopes. Other evenings, they would simply talk, not the formal debates of their Roman days, but the kind of conversation that emerges when minds are quiet and hearts are open. They spoke of what they were learning from the land, how patience, real patience, felt different from mere waiting, how the rhythm of seasons was teaching them about their own cycles of growth and rest. I used to think, Marcus said one night, watching sparks rise toward the stars, that philosophy was about having answers. Now I wonder if it's more about living the questions well. The others nodded, understanding. They were all learning to live questions well, questions about what truly mattered, about how to build something lasting in an uncertain world, about finding peace not in the absence of challenge, but in the presence of deeper purpose. And always, always, there were the stars. In Rome, the city's glow had dimmed the night sky to a handful of bright points. Here in their valley, the heavens opened like a scroll written in light. The same stars that had guided travelers and inspired poets, that had watched over countless generations of humans learning to live wisely. Lying on their backs in the grass, they would trace the ancient patterns. The Great Bear wheeling slowly overhead, Orion striding across the winter sky, the Pleiades clustering like distant campfires, reminding them that they were part of something vast and enduring. Look how small our worries seem from here, Antonius would murmur. And it was true. The concerns that had once loomed so large, the political machinations, the social climbing, even the very exile that had brought them here, all of it seemed to dissolve into proper proportion beneath that immense canopy of light. You might know this feeling too. Those moments when you step outside after a difficult day, and the sky reminds you of your place in the larger story. When the stars whisper what your busy mind sometimes forgets, that you are both infinitely small and infinitely precious, that the work you're doing matters, and that you matter beyond the work you're doing. The natural world was becoming their teacher in ways they'd never expected. The olive trees showed them how to bend without breaking, how to sink roots deep while reaching toward light. The seasons demonstrated the wisdom of cycles, times for planting and times for harvesting, times for activity and times for rest. They watched the birds migrate and return, following patterns older than any human philosophy. They observed how water always finds its way, not by forcing through obstacles, but by flowing around them or through them, or sometimes by waiting until the obstacle itself changes. Nature never hurries, Lucius observed one morning, watching the sun rise with its ancient patience. Yet everything is accomplished in its proper time. This was perhaps the hardest lesson for minds trained in the urgency of Roman life, the understanding that some things simply cannot be rushed. That growth happens in its own rhythm, whether it's the growth of crops or communities or the deep changes in one's own soul. They were learning what you perhaps are learning too, that sustainable progress looks different from frantic activity, that the most important transformations happen quietly, like seeds germinating in dark soil, like friendships deepening through shared silence, like wisdom settling into the heart through patient attention to what is real. Their evening conversations began to attract others from the surrounding farms. Word spread quietly through the valley, not of great philosophers dispensing wisdom, but of thoughtful people living differently, people who seemed to have found something that others were seeking. These visitors would join them around the fire, farmers and shepherds, craftsmen and their wives. They came not for elaborate theories, but for the simple nourishment of genuine conversation, for the rare experience of being truly heard, truly seen. And in this sharing, something beautiful was happening. The boundaries between teacher and student, between philosopher and farmer, began to dissolve. They were all learning from each other, all contributing to a wisdom that belonged to no single person, but to their gathering itself. The old man who tended sheep on the hillside spoke of patience learned from watching clouds. The young mother shared insights about growth that no book could teach. The blacksmith offered thoughts on the relationship between fire and transformation that illuminated truths about the human heart. This was philosophy as it was meant to be, not abstract speculation, but lived wisdom emerging from the marriage of thought and experience. Not something separate from daily life, but something that transformed daily life into something sacred. As the fire burned low and the evening drew to its close, they would sit in comfortable silence, each carrying away not just ideas, but nourishment for the soul, the kind of nourishment that comes from genuine community, from being part of something larger than oneself while never losing sight of one's unique contribution. They were discovering what you perhaps are discovering in your own way, that the most profound changes happen not through force or urgency, but through the patient cultivation of what matters most, through showing up day after day to the simple work of living wisely and loving well. The sanctuary was no longer just a place they were building, it was a way of being they were learning to inhabit. One meal, one conversation, one shared moment of wonder at a time. Preserving knowledge. As autumn deepened around their valley sanctuary, something remarkable began to unfold. The philosophers, who had arrived with little more than the knowledge carried in their minds, felt an urgent calling, not just to preserve what they had learned, but to ensure it would outlive them all. Lucius found himself rising earlier each morning, not from restlessness, but from a quiet excitement. In the hours before dawn, while his companions still slept, he would sit by the dying embers of the previous night's fire and carefully transcribe passages from memory onto precious sheets of parchment. His hand moved with deliberate precision across the page, capturing not just the words of Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus, but the lived understanding he had gained through years of practice. You know this feeling, don't you? That sense of urgency that comes not from panic, but from purpose. The recognition that what you're building, what you've learned through trial and error, through sleepless nights and hard-won victories, this knowledge has value beyond your own life. It needs to be preserved, shared, passed on. The other philosophers soon joined this quiet morning ritual. Gaius, with his gift for clear explanation, began writing commentaries that made complex philosophical concepts accessible to ordinary minds. He would pause between sentences, gazing out at the mist rising from their fields, then return to his work with renewed clarity about how to bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and daily life. Marcus, the youngest among them, took on the task of organizing their growing collection. He created careful inventories, noting not just which texts they possessed, but which were missing, which gaps in human knowledge they might yet fill through their own observations and insights. His methodical nature, once focused on the politics of Rome, now served a deeper purpose. And Titus surprised them all. This man who had seemed most concerned with practical matters revealed a poet's heart. He began recording not just philosophical treatises, but the stories of their community, the conversations with farmers that had led to unexpected insights, the moments of breakthrough when abstract principles suddenly became lived truth. He understood that wisdom lives not just in formal texts, but in the stories of how that wisdom transforms ordinary lives. As word of their growing library spread quietly through the surrounding countryside, something beautiful began to happen. Local craftspeople, farmers, even traveling merchants would arrive not just for the evening discussions, but carrying their own contributions. A weaver brought songs her grandmother had sung, filled with folk wisdom about patience and perseverance. A blacksmith shared practical knowledge about working with fire and metal that contained profound metaphors for transformation. They were creating something unprecedented, a repository of knowledge that honored both the formal learning of the academies and the hard-won wisdom of ordinary life. Philosophy was finding its way into discussions of crop rotation and child-rearing, while practical knowledge was illuminating abstract principles in ways the philosophers had never imagined. But Lucius understood that preservation required more than just collecting and copying. True preservation meant creating living knowledge, wisdom that would continue to grow and adapt long after they were gone. And so they began to teach. Not in the formal manner of the Roman schools with their rigid hierarchies and competitive debates. Instead, they taught as the valley itself had taught them, through patient example, through invitation rather than instruction, through creating space for understanding to unfold naturally. Young people from nearby villages began arriving, drawn by stories of a place where learning happened differently. They came expecting to memorize texts and recite arguments. Instead, they found themselves working alongside the philosophers in the fields, their hands in the soil, while their minds grappled with questions about virtue and meaning. One young woman, the daughter of a local potter, possessed a remarkable memory and a hunger for learning that reminded Lucius of his own younger self. As she helped him copy texts each morning, she would ask questions that cut straight to the heart of complex issues. Her fresh perspective often illuminated passages he thought he understood completely, showing him new layers of meaning he had missed. "Master Lucius," she said one morning, pausing in her careful copying of Epictetus, "this passage about accepting what we cannot control, does it mean we should never try to change difficult circumstances?" Her question sparked a discussion that lasted through the morning and continued over their midday meal. By evening, it had drawn in half the community, each person contributing their own experience of the delicate balance between acceptance and action. The young woman's simple question had become a catalyst for collective understanding that enriched them all. This was how real knowledge was preserved, Lucius realized, not through rigid transmission from teacher to student, but through the living process of questions and exploration, of ancient wisdom meeting fresh minds and contemporary challenges. As winter approached, they faced a practical problem that would test everything they had learned about preservation and protection. Their collection of texts and writings had grown substantial, but it remained vulnerable. A single fire, a raid by hostile forces, even a severe storm could destroy months of careful work. The solution came, as the best solutions often did, through collaboration between philosophical wisdom and practical knowledge. The blacksmith, who had become part of their evening circle, suggested creating a hidden repository, not just a room or building that could be discovered and destroyed, but something more ingenious. Working together through the short winter days, they excavated a space beneath the old stone foundation of the original farmhouse. But this was no mere cellar. They lined it with stones, sealed it against moisture, and created a ventilation system that would preserve their precious manuscripts through any season. More importantly, they designed multiple entrances, hidden throughout their property, so that knowledge could be accessed even if part of their sanctuary was compromised. The work was painstaking, requiring the same patient attention they brought to their copying and teaching. Each stone had to be perfectly placed. Each manuscript had to be carefully wrapped and stored. Each entrance had to be concealed with natural skill that would fool even careful observers. But as they worked, something profound was happening. The physical act of creating this hidden library was transforming their understanding of what they were truly preserving. It wasn't just texts and ideas. It was a way of living, a method of inquiry, a commitment to the ongoing human project of understanding and wisdom. You understand this, don't you? The weight of carrying something precious, something that extends beyond your own immediate concerns. Whether it's the knowledge you've gained through building what you're building, the insights you've developed about leadership and human nature, or simply the hard-won understanding of how to persist when everything seems impossible. As they sealed the final entrance to their hidden library, Lucius felt a deep satisfaction settle in his chest. Not the satisfaction of completion, for their work would never be complete, but the satisfaction of having created something that could endure. Their library contained copies of the great philosophical works, yes, but it also held their own writings, their commentaries, their records of conversations and insights. It preserved the songs and stories shared by their neighbors, the practical wisdom of farmers and craftspeople, the questions asked by eager young minds. Most importantly, it held something that couldn't be destroyed, even if every manuscript was lost. The living example of how knowledge was meant to be shared. Every person who had participated in creating this sanctuary, who had contributed to its library, who had learned from its teachings, carried within themselves the capacity to recreate what they had built together. The true preservation wasn't in the hidden room beneath the stone foundation. It was in the transformed lives, the changed perspectives, the new ways of seeing and being that would travel with each person who left their valley. Knowledge preserved not in static form, but as living wisdom that would continue to grow and adapt and inspire wherever it went. That winter, as snow covered their valley and the community gathered closer around their evening fires, Lucius often thought about the nature of legacy. What did it mean to preserve something truly valuable? How could wisdom survive the inevitable changes and challenges that lay ahead? The answer, he had come to understand, lay not in trying to freeze knowledge in perfect form, but in teaching others to think and question and discover for themselves, in creating not just repositories of information, but communities of inquiry, in showing that the most important preservation happened not through hiding wisdom away, but through living it so fully and joyfully that others would want to learn its secrets. As you lie here now, carrying the weight of your own responsibilities and dreams, perhaps you can feel the connection to this ancient understanding. The knowledge you've gained, the insights you've developed, the wisdom you've earned through your own trials and persistence. These too are treasures worth preserving, not just for your own benefit, but for all those who will come after. The people you lead, the community you serve, the future builders who will learn from what you've discovered about courage and perseverance and hope. Your life itself is becoming a form of preserved knowledge, a living testament to what's possible when someone refuses to give up on what matters most. A lasting legacy. The seasons turned, and turned again, and with each passing year, the weight of what Lucius and his companions had built grew not heavier, but somehow more luminous. Like stones worn smooth by countless gentle touches of wind and rain, word reached them eventually, as word always does, carried by merchants and travelers who had begun to seek out their valley specifically, that the Emperor Domitian was dead, that the harsh decrees had been swept away with the changing of power in Rome, that philosophers were welcome once more in the marble halls and bustling forums of the eternal city. Some of their number chose to return, and Lucius blessed their departure with genuine warmth. Marcus, whose hands had learned to shape both clay and young minds, packed his few belongings and set out for Rome with eyes bright with possibility. He carried with him not just scrolls and memories, but something far more precious, the knowledge of what it meant to build something lasting from nothing but intention and daily commitment. Others followed in the months that came after, each taking with them seeds of what they had discovered in that hidden valley. each becoming a carrier of the quiet wisdom they had cultivated through seasons of patient tending. But Lucius found himself choosing to remain, not from fear of the world beyond their sanctuary, not from attachment to the familiar rhythms they had created, but from a deeper recognition that what he had found here was not a retreat from his true work, but the very heart of it. The morning he made this decision final, he walked the paths they had worn smooth through years of contemplation, past the olive groves now heavy with silver-green fruit, past the workshop where young hands still learned to shape wood and stone and ideas with equal care, past the library where afternoon light still fell across pages that held both ancient wisdom and fresh insights born from their shared inquiry. He paused at the spot where they had first cleared ground for their simple dwellings, where 4 exiled philosophers had once stood with nothing but uncertainty and a stubborn refusal to abandon what mattered most. The earth beneath his feet held the memory of every season they had weathered, every conversation that had shaped their understanding, every quiet moment of recognition when abstract philosophy had transformed into lived wisdom. This, too, was a form of preservation. He realized, not just the copying of texts or the teaching of principles, but the patient cultivation of a way of being that could endure beyond any individual life. You understand this, don't you? This recognition that what you're building extends far beyond the immediate goals that occupy your days. That the weight you carry is not just about this quarter's results or next year's expansion, but about something that will continue to grow and influence long after your own direct involvement has ended. The young people who still came to learn in their valley, they would carry forward not just philosophical concepts, but lived examples of how to remain steady in uncertainty, how to find meaning in simple daily practices, how to build something beautiful from whatever materials life provides. The farmers and craftspeople who had become part of their evening gatherings, they returned to their own work, carrying new ways of seeing, new appreciation for the dignity of honest labor, new understanding that wisdom could emerge from any life lived with attention and care. Even the travelers who stayed only briefly, merchants and pilgrims and wanderers of every description, they departed with something they hadn't possessed when they arrived. A memory of what it felt like to be part of something larger than individual ambition, a glimpse of community built on shared inquiry rather than mere convenience. As the years deepened around their sanctuary, Lucius began to see their work with different eyes. What had begun as preservation, the desperate attempt to save knowledge from destruction, had become something far more alive and generative. They were not just maintaining what had existed before, they were participating in its continued evolution. Each conversation around their evening fire added new insights to ancient questions. Each season of shared labor revealed fresh understanding about what it meant to live well. Each person who joined their community for however brief a time contributed their own piece to the growing mosaic of wisdom. The library had grown, not just in the number of scrolls it contained, but in the quality of inquiry it supported. Students came now from distant cities, not to memorize established doctrines, but to engage in the kind of genuine questioning that could only happen in an atmosphere of safety and mutual respect. The workshops had multiplied, spaces where philosophy and practical skill informed each other in ways that enriched both, where young people learned that there was no separation between thinking clearly and working skillfully, that both required the same qualities of attention, patience, and commitment to excellence. The gardens provided not just food for their bodies, but daily lessons in the patient tending that all worthwhile growth requires, in the careful balance between intervention and allowing, in the trust that what is planted with care and tended with consistency will bear fruit in its proper season. But perhaps most precious of all, their community had become a living demonstration that it was possible to build something beautiful and enduring without sacrificing the values that made it worth building in the first place. They had discovered that true strength came not from dominating or controlling, but from creating conditions where everyone could contribute their best gifts. That real security emerged not from accumulating resources, but from cultivating relationships based on genuine care and mutual support. That lasting influence flowed not from position or power, but from the quiet example of lives lived with integrity and purpose. This understanding, Lucius realized, was perhaps their most important contribution to the world. Not any particular philosophical insight or practical innovation, but the lived proof that another way was possible. The weight you carry. It contains this same potential. Every decision you make with care rather than mere expediency. Every person you treat with dignity regardless of their position or usefulness to your immediate goals. Every moment you choose long-term flourishing over short-term advantage. These become part of a legacy that extends far beyond what you can directly measure or control. The people who work alongside you are learning not just skills and strategies, but ways of being in the world. They watch how you handle pressure and uncertainty. They notice whether your actions align with your stated values. They absorb lessons about leadership and character that they will carry into their own spheres of influence for decades to come. The community that surrounds your work. Customers, partners, neighbors, family. They too are affected by the choices you make about how to build what you're building. Whether you approach your work as extraction or contribution. Whether you see others as resources to be used or as fellow human beings deserving of respect and consideration. Even your competitors and critics, they respond to the example you set. When you choose collaboration over domination, excellence over mere winning, integrity over expedience, you create ripples that influence the entire ecosystem in which you operate. As twilight settled over the valley on what would be Lucius's final evening, though he could not know this, he walked once more through the spaces they had created together, the paths worn smooth by countless contemplative walks, the gathering places where so many conversations had deepened understanding, the quiet corners where individuals had wrestled with their own questions and found their own answers. Everything glowed with the golden light that comes only at day's end, when the angle of illumination reveals textures and beauties that remain hidden in the harsher brightness of midday. The olive trees cast long shadows across ground that held the memory of every season they had witnessed. The workshop stood ready for tomorrow's work, tools arranged with the care that comes from years of practice. The library waited in peaceful silence, its treasures available to any sincere seeker. But it was not the physical structures that moved him most deeply. It was the recognition that what they had truly built could never be destroyed by any external force. It lived now in the habits of thought and patterns of relationship that their community had cultivated. It continued in the lives of all those who had been touched by their example. It would flourish wherever people chose to prioritize wisdom over cleverness, community over competition, long-term flourishing over short-term gain. This was the true meaning of preservation, not the static maintenance of what had been, but the dynamic cultivation of what could continue to grow and evolve and contribute to human flourishing for generations yet to come. And as the first stars appeared above the valley where 4 exiled philosophers had once arrived with nothing but uncertainty and hope, as the evening breeze carried the scent of herbs and the sound of quiet laughter from the gathering places where new conversations were beginning, as the weight of another day's honest work settled into the satisfaction that comes only from knowing you have contributed something worthwhile to the world, Lucius felt the deep peace that flows from a life lived in alignment with what matters most. Knowing that what you have built with patience and care and love will continue to grow and flourish and nourish others long after your own direct tending has ended. Like seeds carried on the wind to take root in soil you will never see, creating forests of possibility for those who come after.